you.
Mike?
What reading strategies do you suggest for someone who picks up the new exegesis and sits down at page 1?
That's a great question.
Read the introduction.
Well, I think that, I mean, it's a lovely question, and it's the sort of book that could, invite all sorts of different strategies. I mean, I do think that Pamela did a superb job of discovering the degree to which there was a narrative to discover. She found it, and it's really actually surprised me. I mean, for all my familiarity with portions of this manuscript, it surprised me how, when I finally read her kind of, rough assembly, as you would say in the film world, I thought, wait a minute, it is a book. It does have a progression, as long as you grant that it's not going to have any ending except falling off the cliff of mortality at the end. But I also think you could delve in according to your curiosity. You could just flip through it and find sequences that interested you. Then you could then use the index to bounce back to concepts or motifs that were similar. I also think that for readers of his fiction, it's possible to decide to see what he has to say about your favorite of his novels, and to say, well, because one of the things that makes the Exegesis so unique as a piece of writing is from the perspective of a novelist considering his own novels. I can't think of any precedent for someone reading themselves with such a radical susceptibility to their own concepts. He will come across, Maze of Death or Galactic Pot Healer, and suddenly, for that moment, it will seem as much to propose the solution to the mystery of all existence as, Heidegger had the week before, or some other, instigating text. And so he'll read himself with this incredible intensity, as if it's a kind of, almost like a gospel that's been handed down to him. So if you love one of the novels, you might go to the index and figure out where he's talking about that book. Another approach would be, if you're very much in sympathy with one of the annotators, you could go and look for all of Erik's annotations, for instance, or all of Catherine Hale's, or Gabriel McKee's, and follow that thread. It would be another way to get into the book.
Yeah, another way is to, we work pretty hard on having a reasonably complete glossary, because he does throw a lot of terms out there. There's a lot of references to philosophers and poets and literary figures, and that can be very intimidating. And he was a voracious and very global and multidimensional intellect. But it's important to remember that he almost all of the time he was reading the encyclopedia. And so you too can read the encyclopedia. You can look at the glossary, or you sit there with your Wikipedia open, and when he mentions Parmenides and you're like, don't quite remember Parmenides, just pop on for just a little hit, and you'll be able to kind of roll along. Because half the time that's what he's doing. He's more riffing with bits than like deeply engaging in like the complexities of these philosophers, and I think it's a much richer experience for that. You get a little bit of an education, and what happens is that all these voices start bouncing around your own head, and in a way, there was an earlier question about how this material gets reflected in the fiction, and it's really like the bowl sessions in Valis, and particularly the first half of Valis, where you see what happens when this kind of thinking and this kind of material becomes part of a social engagement and part of the way that people together try to work through and think through things. There's all the same kind of references to the same kinds of texts. Some of the lines are very similar to things you find in the exegesis. So in a way, the more that you can be at that late night, bull session, going through this stuff with him, he's kind of, monologuing, unsurprisingly. But, you're there and you're kind of like riding the riffs. A lot of things I think will open up, and it will make more sense, because it does make sense. It makes a lot of very deep forms of sense, albeit in a kind of unusual way.
Hi.
As his daughters, were you aware that he had had those experiences, and did he sort of talk about it as a normal part of your life?
Go for it.
Well, he did somewhat to me. He definitely shared an experience that he had with, the way he described it was an angel that was above my brother while he was playing in a sandbox. And he talked to me about this experience, and he had tears, and he was sobbing. And I knew that whatever it was that he experienced, whatever connection it was that he had, was very, very real. So for me, as a kid, I was impressed that obviously he was very passionate about something. It was a little scary, but I got it.
How
that,
old were you then?
Well, I would have been 12-ish. And he described a few other things, but that's the one that stands out most in my mind. I think he was a little hesitant to get too into it because it would have been extremely confusing, for a kid. And I can't speak for Laura, but do you have any recollection?
My answer is no. He never spoke to me about it. He never wrote about it. And I think the reason that he did is I think he wanted my approval. And very much interacted with me as almost my age. I was in my 20s, or was 74. I was 14 through 22 when he passed away. And he interacted with me as if he was an older teen. And I think it was important for him that I thought he was cool. And I think he didn't venture into that area because I think he thought I wouldn't see it as cool. And he was right. I would have been.
Another question for the daughters. The typing was sort of unbelievable when I read about that. 120 words a minute and like 57 pages a day. Did either of you ever see him in one of those typing moods?
What do they call the pecking?
Hunt and peck.
He was so fast. I mean, I remember that about it. That it was the fastest I've ever seen anyone type. But I don't know. Maybe Laura has other recollections.
So our father, who art in heaven, he left when I was 3.5, and when he wrote, when he was married to my mom, who was his third wife, he was writing in this little cabin around the corner that they called the hovel. I think I'm not sure exactly why. I could go back to the different theories. So I didn't see it, but anecdotally, my mother talked about it all the time. That he would write a book in 2 weeks, literally just go and not sleep. And then, of course, she had no idea whatsoever that there was any amphetamines involved. That just never even occurred to her. It wasn't even part of her life context until after he left, and there were a number of pharmacies that sent bills to the house. So that was her first. That was her first glimpse that there was something that was maybe external. Your mom's a very smart woman, but didn't have that life experience.
But he was just using the two fingers. He wasn't like the. Oh my God.
Manual number 112.
Oh, it was definitely man. Oh no, didn't it have a selectric in the end? It had a selectric in the end. It had one of those ball things.
Oh.
Did it? Was that? Yeah.
Hi, right in the center there. Hi.
Hi. I live down by Alston and McGee, and the mythology is that Philip lives right around the corner from me on Alston. Is that where you grew up, or do you remember living there at all?
I lived in Point Reyes my entire life. Was born in San Francisco, so never lived in Berkeley. But we drove around and looked at all the houses, Lisa and I, one day, and I have all the addresses written down. I went to the Berkeley Historical Society and looked them up in the phone book and found residences that nobody had known about. So I can't really say exactly where it was, but he lived in the Flatlands. He lived on Bancroft at one time. He lived on Alston at one time. So
Francisco Street.
Francisco Street is where the little house was, and the last time I looked, it was for sale. It's awful cute, but there's just no way I'm buying that house. So he always said he lived in the Flatlands.